The profound connection between the Great Dane and my best companion, Mark, will be shared with you. The home was devoid of sound on that particular day. Mark and I were the sole individuals present, as my parents were not in the city. Nevertheless, this tranquility was solely a superficial silence. The relationship between Mark and I was anything but tranquil that day. This is the narrative of our profound connection, the intricate emotions, and the process of personal development. That day, the home was exceedingly tranquil. Mark and I were the sole individuals present, as my parents were in another location. She had been reclining on the settee for hours, observing the television screen indifferently as a comedy was broadcast. I genuinely did not care about anything other than what was in front of my eyes, as the situation was so mute. Mark abruptly arose, his eyes ablaze with an uncommonly intense radiance, as if he were attempting to fathom a critical accident. As he transitioned to the realm of explanations, he ran toward the primary entrance. Choose a click that is both gentle and discreet. Mark had closed the door with a latch, slowly turned, and his eyes became more intense with an inexplicable intensity. He then quickly returned to his feet to approach me before I could realize what was occurring. Mark pounced on me, striking me without allowing me to respond. Time seemed to be slowing down, and the space appeared to be confined. She was in a state of disbelief and paralysis. Subsequently, the second round occurred, which rendered all boundaries obsolete. Consequently, I came to the realization that my existence would be irrevocably transformed. Greetings, I am Emma, a young woman who is approaching the age of 18 and is content with her modest family as the sole daughter. I am fortunate to have parents who deeply love and care for me. They consistently support my personal interests and provide me with the highest quality of care. The development of pets, notably beautiful dogs, is my greatest passion among these interests. My affection for canines was initiated at the age of 18. I predominantly viewed animal-themed television programs at that time, and the images of horses and dogs always captivated my attention. For an extended period, I implored my parents to acquire me a companion. Eventually, my parents arrived and escorted me to the altar to select a four-legged comrade as my companion. Upon entering the refuge, I was immediately struck by the tranquility of the canines. Nevertheless, one dog in particular immediately captivated my attention, despite the fact that there were many others. Her body was exceedingly long, and she had kind eyes and a flat face. The Great Dane, despite his reputation as a large dog, was an endearing and innocent puppy. From the instant I encountered that dog, I detected a unique bond between us. Please do not hesitate to select me as your new acquaintance. My parents were initially taken aback by my decision. They were apprehensive that a dog of the magnitude of a Great Dane would be challenging to manage. I was nevertheless convinced of its veracity due to my affection and admiration for that particular companion. We transport him to our residence and address him as Mark. During my initial days with Mark, I had an incredibly memorable experience. He exhibited kindness and generosity. Mark era altamente inteligente y aprendió rápidamente comandos básicos como esperar, parar y sentarse. We formed close friendships, sharing every moment, from leisurely strolls through the park to tranquil moments. Mark's development was swift as time progressed. He underwent a transformation into a tall, compassionate, and honest dog. Mark is not merely a companion, he is also a substantial member of the family. Mark's gentle eyes and endearing curls provide me with solace whenever I am experiencing tension or melancholy. Mark is more than just a dog to me. She is a friend, a companion, and a testament to her unconditional affection for both humans and animals. In part due to Mark, I have developed the capacity to appreciate the more fundamental aspects of life, as well as to be patient and responsible. I believe that each individual necessitates a unique companion such as Mark in their life, an individual who loves them unconditionally and never abandons them, irrespective of their identity or location. I have always maintained the conviction that Mark and I would be inseparable and lead a tranquil existence. Nevertheless, an unforeseen occurrence transpired when I was 20 years old, which significantly altered our relationship. It was a gorgeous Sunday morning, as is customary. Mark and I proceeded to stroll through the park in close proximity to our residence. Mark derives pleasure from walking in this fashion. She ran, breathed fresh air, and occasionally barred me from smelling the flowers or watching the birds soar. She was consistently joyful and content during those instances. Mark and I began our standard Sunday morning stroll through the park, relishing the simple delights of life with my dear friend by my side. The dog was in a state of ecstasy, leaping and hopping as he absorbed the pleasurable ambience. Then, an extraordinary event transpired. Mark abruptly halted upon hearing a disturbance and focused his attention on a dog that was located in the distance. It was a Grand Dane dog, majestic in both appearance and movement, radiant like the sun's beams. Mark was drawn to her by an invisible gravitational force as he peered at her. She was unable to react in time due to the rapid movement of her thighs and the agitation of her body. It would appear that I had placed all of my weight on it when I would firmly clasp it by the neck. However, it was so powerful that it had no effect. He distanced me, resulting in my near fall and stumbling. The sound of Mark's name was grating with intensity, but it seemed to achieve nothing. He solely pursued his own path to the other dog. I was unsure of what to do as my pulse beat frantically, as if the world had demonstrated evidence of love at first sight. In a moment of despair, shout, "Mark!" as it was adequately powerful to prevent it from moving. It was taken and subsequently returned, resulting in a feeling of confusion and remorse on my part. He was only then able to fully experience the sadness in his heart. He gazed at the ground and his eyelids drooped, as if he comprehended my distress regarding his actions. I was compelled to delicately extract it from its chain and transport it to my residence. I noticed something peculiar about Mark's conduct on the way back. He was no longer running freely and drinking coffee with pleasure. Rather, he was walking quietly and slowly by my side. The sensation that arose in my chest was indescribable. Mark profoundly repulsed me, and I felt remorseful for having betrayed him. I was most apprehensive about the prospect of our friendship remaining unchanged from that point forward. That evening, Mark remained seated in a corner of the room, his gaze fixed on something else. It is possible that she was still reflecting on the substantial damage she had endured that morning. "Mark, I will always adore you, regardless of the circumstances." I will gently stroke his soft coat as I approach. "Nevertheless, it is imperative that you pay attention to my advice. Are you cognizant of this?" Mark lifted his head and fixed his gaze on me, his eyes beaming as if he were expressing his consent. I still maintained the optimism that nothing would separate us, and a slight smile appeared on my face. The evening arrived, and I, as is customary, snuggled up with Mark. Mark was acclimated to standing by my side. His paused respiration had consistently provided me with a sense of tranquility. I rubbed his stiff hair, as I always did before going to bed, licking his jaw. Nevertheless, Mark's inadvertent contact of a specific location elicited a small giggle, as if he were experiencing an unusual event. The gelatin was exceedingly gentle, which was adequate to satisfy me. Nevertheless, Mark continued to remain passive, seemingly without movement. "Withdraw my hand with gentleness." I experienced an increase in my heart rate compared to its usual rate. During that fleeting moment, I was struck by an unusual sensation that was both perplexing and unexpected. I sit silently, gazing at the ceiling in the soft, diffused light of the nightlight. I was overwhelmed with irrational thoughts, which caused me to feel uneasy. This was not the first instance of a unique sense of proximity between Mark and me, without a doubt. However, it was exceedingly peculiar at this precise moment. The curiosity was genuinely affecting my emotions, as this new dynamic would leave me lost in thought as I endeavored to understand it for the two. As the evening progressed, I became more cognizant of the fact that something had changed between us, that Mark's previous behavior and my responses had unlocked emotions that had not been thoroughly explored. It appeared that our connection was more profound and intricate, and we would confront any challenge together. Mark was already awake when I awoke the following morning, and his gaze was a combination of loyalty and a newfound understanding. On occasion, I would be delighted to offer him a newfound sense of purpose. "Good morning, Mark." I greeted him as he washed his hair. "Are you in accord that today will be an exceptional day?" Mark moved the cup with ease, as if he were in agreement with me. I was conscious that our relationship was stronger than it had ever been, and that we would confront any challenge that arose together as we began our day. I gradually arose from my bed and surveyed the surroundings. In front of me, an axe lay on the ground. Upon observing it, I was overcome with an ineffable sense of euphoria and anxiety. As I gazed at the tree, I gradually felt a surge of anxiety in my bosom. My mind progressively expanded, as if it were regulating something over time. It appeared to be both balmy and indescribable. Mark's body shuddered slightly with each repetition. Subsequently, an object descended from my grasp and began to flow. I observed Mark, who was still slumber, without any intention of rousing him. I gingerly placed him on the bed and wrapped him in my arms. I was unable to fall asleep promptly that evening. I continued to experience an unusual level of excitement and emotion in my consciousness, as if a new door had been opened between Mark and me. Mark was not only a loyal dog, but also a complex being with emotions and behaviors that required time to comprehend. I did not anticipate that his intuitive response would elicit a more profound connection and a more unique experience for me. That evening, I experienced an unusual sensation that is challenging to describe. My heart beats more rapidly and promptly as I observe Mark. In the interim, the rapid pulse had become even more rapid. I no longer regard Mark as a companion or a friend. Rather, I regard him in a more profound and distinctive manner. Mark also appeared to have observed a distinction in me, as the eyes of each individual who gazed upon him were unique. This sensation left me feeling bewildered and emotional, prompting me to inquire as to what was precisely occurring within me. They appeared to be more attentive and graceful. This was analogous to attempting to interpret my thoughts. Mark was occasionally taken aback by my extended gaze. He was unable to recognize the emotion that was enveloping his brilliant eyes. Our relationship was already profound. It now seemed as though it had acquired a new significance. One afternoon, Mark and I were seated on the veranda, and the sun's rays were gently reflecting off the trees in front of us. Mark closed his eyes and placed his head on my shoulder, as if he were relishing the tranquility of the moment. I extended my hand and felt the warmth that emanated from Mark's supple skin. Nevertheless, this time, I experienced a sensation similar to that of an electrical current coursing through my body, rather than my typical perception. I was taken aback by the unanticipated nature of this simple connection. I fixedly observed Mark for an extended period as I leaned in. He opened his eyes, and his large, dark irises radiated an uncommon form of knowledge. At that moment, it appeared as though he was attempting to communicate something that neither of us could articulate in words. However, we were both aware that the other person comprehended. Mark's gaze was perplexing to me, yet it simultaneously elicited an unusual sense of tenderness. It is customary for everything to go awry until one day. Mark and I were the only ones at home that day, as my parents were absent for the entire day. The house, which was perpetually alive with warmth and merriment, was now enveloped in a peculiar silence. Mark and I were the sole individuals in that enormous expanse. I experienced an unusual level of excitement as a result of this respiration, as if an event were imminent. Mark positioned himself adjacent to me, his gaze tracing my every movement. It seemed as though the atmosphere was almost eerie on that particular day. I was perplexed as to why I was feeling so apprehensive. However, it seemed as though they were merely anticipating something, despite Mark's consistently perceptive and smooth eyes. The home was silent, with the sole sound emanating from the clock's tic-tac-toe pattern that resonated in the air. Mark and I were observing the screen pulsate with the light of a comedy film while seated in the room. We were enveloped in a serene environment, and our attention was primarily focused on the visuals that were presented to us. Mark abruptly rose from his seat, his eyes glowing with an unusual intensity, as if he were on the brink of realizing something significant. He proceeded toward the primary entrance, without uttering a single word. I selected a gentle sound after Mark had closed the door with a key. Upon his return, his irises were filled with an intense emotion that was challenging to discern. Subsequently, he hastily approached me. Before I could fully understand the situation, Mark launched himself at me without providing me with an opportunity to react. The space seemed to become congested under the weight of an indefinable entity. Inertia seemed to have halted the passage of time. I felt as though a cycle was engulfing me, merging all the barriers together. I was under the impression that I was merely inhaling deeply while reclining on the sofa. Mark was standing in close proximity to my feet, with his head resting gently on my shoulder. The intense light of the television illuminating his eyes. Mark abruptly rose from his seat, his eyes alight with an unusual hue, as if he were on the brink of a significant realization. He proceeded toward the primary entrance without uttering a single word. I continued to contemplate the situation when I heard a mild click. Mark had secured the door with a key. His eyes were fixed on a profound and challenging to identify emotion as he turned around. Following that, he hastily approached me. Mark jumped over me before I could fully understand the situation, thereby denying me the chance to respond. The area appeared to be oppressive. It appeared that the time was rapidly approaching its closure. Hi, Autonita. I am currently immobilized. A sudden force, analogous to a tornado, tore through all of the borders. This repentant emotion paralyzed me, preventing me from responding. The passage of time appeared to be slowing down. Increasing tension was perceived as engulfing the space. The swell of my heart within my chest was the only exception to the transformation of everything in my proximity into a nebula. After that, it was akin to a hurricane. He removed all impediments and distances. He was unable to perceive Mark's possessions. At that time, no one was aware of what to do. Nevertheless, he was certain of one thing. The events that were to occur would have a lasting impact on my life. It was as though a door had been unlocked, and it would not be closed again. Since that time, Mark and I have been connected by an intangible chain of emotions that are challenging to articulate. This connection has persisted and continues to torment me. The events that occurred have never been the subject of discussion. Nevertheless, we were cognizant of the fact that we were contemplating it each time our gazes intersected. Silence prevailed. A secret that persisted in the silence of this house between us. The subsequent occurrence was significantly less complex. Nature assumed its position, as if there were a silent agreement or understanding. Additionally, each time we entered the room, we were both aware of the appropriate dining establishment. Mark approached me with both force and tenderness, extending his arms as if to make a claim that I was his. The door then closed. I am unable to assert that I would be entirely opposed, as a portion of me was anticipating that sensation. A sensation that is both exhilarating and arresting. Whenever Mark and I were together, I experienced a sensation of having neglected everything in my vicinity. An internal explosion and panic ensued as a result of a surge of emotions that overwhelmed me. It was not exclusively physical contact. It was as though each cell in my body began to respond to Mark's presence. I experienced an increase in my heart rate. I experienced an increase in the difficulty of respiration. Additionally, I was incapable of controlling my body's reactions. The anxiety and the thoughts of the repercussions dissipated, leaving only the potent allure that Mark had elicited. I would sit and ask inquiries when the room would return to silence in moments like this. I was cognizant of the fact that the situation was unjust. My parents, who had consistently placed their faith in us, would never consent to it. Nevertheless, this sensation, which was inexplicable, was irrevocable. It was akin to an addiction, causing me to experience an increased sense of hunger and anxiety. I kept all of this information to myself and consistently conducted myself in a conventional manner in the presence of my parents. Ultimately, He recognized that this relationship would never be disclosed. Mark and I were once again isolated in the silent house, with the refrigerator's gentle murmur serving as the sole source of sound as the sun began to rise and illuminate the entire space. Mark's palms were in close proximity to his eyes. Thus, I experienced an intense surge of emotion at that precise moment. He approached me at a leisurely pace. His steps were measured yet secure. I perceived a rise in tension. The atmosphere was replete with unpronounced terms. He approached me and placed his head in my hand. His eyes were perpetually fixed on his hands. It was a moment of unadulterated connection, a mute understanding that was transmitted between us. I perceived a combination of emotions, guilt, emotion, and an unspoken and profound affection in that tranquil and private setting. Mark's presence was both reassuring and inspiring. It functions as a reminder of the complex connection we share. I gingerly grasped his shirt, feeling the warmth of his body against my hand. It appeared that all of the world's concerns were dissipating at that time. There were only two of us in our private sanctuary in the wilderness. As the days progressed into weeks, our covert bond was fortified. Our relationship was further bolstered by each shared gaze and stolen moment. I discovered that I eagerly anticipated the moment when we would be alone, when I could cease performing and be with Mark. The desire was irresistible, despite the fact that it was a perilous pastime that could render one completely incapacitated if discovered. Mark was considerably more than a mere mascot. He was my protector, my closest companion, and, in many respects, my soulmate. Nevertheless, the burden of our secret began to exert a substantial amount of pressure on my heart. It was as though every action we were taking was entirely inappropriate. I was vehemently opposed to the information they had provided. Nevertheless, the sensation was too intense and pervasive to ignore. Despite her struggles with remorse and the apprehension of being discovered, she derived solace from the moments we shared. It was analogous to walking along the swaying arm toward the edge of a cliff, but it was an experience that could not be sustained. I came to the realization that our relationship was much more than a mere fleeting romantic attraction as I observed Mark play in the garden one day.